The sound wasn't just noise anymore. It was alive. Inside the packed arena, 18,000 voices merged into one unrelenting wall of sound, a thunderous storm that rattled rib cages, shook steel beams, and sent a living pulse through every body in the building. It wasn't just cheering. It was primal, a scream, a chant, a tidal wave of worship. And in the eye of that storm was Freddie Mercury. Drenched in sweat, his chest glistening beneath the brutal heat of stage lights, he strutted across the massive platform like a man who owned the very air people breathed. His tight white trousers shimmered under the strobes. His microphone stand twirled in his hand like a sword, and his voice, that impossible, 4-octave voice, ripped across the crowd with the force of a hurricane. "EO!" He threw the call out like a lightning bolt. "EO!" The crowd of 18,000 screamed it back, every man, woman, and teenager straining their lungs to match him. He raised a hand, commanding silence, then teased them again. Louder, sharper, faster. It was no longer a concert. It was a battle cry, an electric communion between one man and thousands of disciples. Freddie grinned, wicked and playful, his dark eyes scanning the sea of faces. He lived for this, the moment when an entire arena bent his will, when joy and hysteria became one. The band was locked in tight behind him. Brian May's guitar shimmering like firelight, Roger Taylor hammering his drums with volcanic force, John Deacon steady as bedrock on bass. Together, they were a machine, but Freddie was a fire that set it ablaze. Spotlights swept across the audience like prison searchlights, revealing thousands of hands in the air, fists pumping, lighters glowing. The energy was intoxicating, a fever with no cure. The building itself seemed to shake, and somewhere outside in the cool night, people on the streets could hear the roar spilling into the sky. But in the chaos, in the third row center, was a single boy, 7 years old. He sat between his parents, so small he looked swallowed by the folding chair. His Queen t-shirt was 2 sizes too big, sleeves slipping over his thin arms, and a baseball cap sat low over his forehead, covering the patches of hair that chemotherapy had stolen. His father had carried him into the arena just an hour before, his small body too weak to walk more than a few steps on his own. The boy's name was Adam. He had leukemia, the kind the doctors whispered about when they thought parents weren't listening, the kind that stole color from cheeks and weight from bones. The doctors had said words no 7-year-old should ever hear. Days left, maybe weeks at most. But Adam had made a wish. One last, impossible wish. "I want to see Freddie Mercury," he'd whispered to his mother that morning, his voice as faint as breath. "Before I go to heaven, I want to see him sing." It had taken desperate phone calls, pleading, favors owed, and a miracle from a friend who knew someone who worked at the venue. But by sundown, Adam and his parents had 3 tickets. Third row, close enough to feel the sweat flying from the stage, close enough to look their hero in the eyes. Now, as the storm of sound tore through the arena, Adam looked up at Freddie Mercury with wide, shining eyes. His lips moved, singing every word, though his voice was too soft to carry beyond the 3 seats they occupied. His mother kept glancing down at him, her heart breaking, torn between fear that the excitement would overwhelm him and awe at how alive he suddenly looked. Because for the first time in months, Adam wasn't a sick child. He was just a boy at a rock concert. The music thundered on. Freddie pranced across the stage, grabbing the mic stand and leaning into the front row, taunting them with playful snarls and dazzling smiles. He was larger than life, but to Adam, he wasn't just a star. He was hope made flesh. As the set rolled toward its heart, Freddie stepped back from the chaos and signaled the band to soften. The spotlights dimmed, the pounding drums hushed, and Brian May strummed the gentle opening chords of "Love of My Life." The audience erupted in cheers before quickly quieting, as if everyone knew the song demanded reverence. Freddie eased himself onto the piano bench, fingers grazing the keys, his voice lowering into something intimate, tender. It was a shift. The wild god of rock suddenly transformed into a poet whispering to every broken heart in the room. "Love of my life, you've hurt me." The words floated out like silk. The audience swayed, thousands of lighters flickering in the dark, tiny flames dancing like fireflies. Couples clutched hands. Strangers wrapped arms around shoulders. A spell descended over the crowd. And that's when it happened. In the third row, Adam's small voice rose. At first, it was just a whisper, barely audible to anyone but his mother. His lips trembled, but he pressed on, singing the words he'd memorized from worn-out cassettes played late into the night. Bring it back, bring it back. It was fragile and perfect, and so heartbreakingly earnest that his father closed his eyes to hold back tears. Then something unexplainable happened. As Freddie reached the second verse, his gaze swept the audience and locked on Adam. The boy was singing. Freddie's hands paused on the piano keys. His voice faltered for half a breath. The crowd, sensing something strange, began to quiet. The music wavered. The spell teetered. And there, in the sudden hush, Adam's tiny voice carried farther than it should have. Clear, innocent, piercing. Don't take it away from me. The band stopped. Freddie Mercury, master of arenas, god of rock and roll, froze. He stared straight into the third row, into the fragile body of a boy who should not have been there, whose voice had somehow reached him through 18,000 others. The silence that followed was louder than the music. 18,000 people leaned forward, sensing the weight of a moment they didn't yet understand. Freddie Mercury's eyes softened. The flamboyance melted. The mask dropped. And for the first time that night, the man who could command thousands was struck speechless by the voice of one. If you are enjoying this story, please subscribe to support the channel. For a moment, nobody breathed. Freddie Mercury sat frozen at the piano, his hands hovering above the keys, his gaze locked on a small boy in the third row. The crowd, sensing something extraordinary, had fallen into a hush so complete that the sound of stage lights buzzing overhead could be heard. Adam's voice, frail, soft, yet impossibly steady, still hung in the air. He had sung just one line, but it was enough. Enough to pierce through 18,000 voices. Enough to break through the wall of noise. Enough to stop the greatest showman on earth in his tracks. Freddie leaned forward, squinting past the blinding floodlights. He could see the boy now. The too big queen shirt. The baseball cap pulled low. The way his mother clutched his tiny shoulders with trembling hands. The look on his father's face. A mixture of pride and terror, as if this boy was a flame that could be extinguished with the smallest gust of wind. The silence stretched. Brian May shifted uneasily, his guitar still slung across his chest. Roger Taylor's drumsticks rested midair, waiting for a cue that didn't come. Even the security guards along the stage edge froze, unsure if they should act. Then the mother stood, her face streaked with tears. She lifted Adam into her arms. He was so small, so light, that she carried him as though he were a bundle of feathers. She tilted her head back toward the stage, her voice breaking as she shouted, "Freddie, please, my son is dying." The words cracked across the arena like thunder. Gasps rippled through the audience. Some clapped hands over their mouths. Others shook their heads in disbelief. The words hung heavy, their weight undeniable. Freddie blinked, stunned, his knuckles tightening on the piano. "He loves you so much," the woman cried again, desperation surging in her voice. "He wanted to see you before it's too late." Adam turned his face toward the stage, and though he was pale, though he trembled in his mother's arms, he managed to smile, a small, fragile smile. Then, in a voice so soft it seemed impossible to hear, he whispered into the silence, "I love you, Freddie." The microphone caught it. Those 5 words, carried by the arena's sound system, seemed to echo forever. Freddie Mercury's throat tightened. His heart lurched. For all his flamboyance, for all his bravado and armor of glitter, he had never been hit with something so raw, so human, so pure. He stood, slowly, from the piano bench. His mic stand tilted, and he grabbed it like a lifeline. His voice, when he spoke, was softer than the crowd had ever heard it. "What's your name, darling?" The boy licked his lips, gathering all the strength he had left, and spoke into the darkness. "Adam!" The crowd erupted in a murmur, whispers, sobs, the sound of 18,000 people grappling with a moment none of them had expected. Freddie pressed a hand to his chest, his eyes glistening under the stage lights. "Adam," he repeated, his voice catching. Then he turned to the band, his voice suddenly firm, commanding, "Stop the show." Brian looked startled. Roger blinked. John Deacon frowned in confusion. Freddie never stopped shows. Not for broken strings, not for power outages, not for anything. The music always went on. But this time, Freddie was unyielding. "Stop everything," he said, his tone brooking no argument. The band obeyed. Freddie returned to the microphone, facing the ocean of faces now staring at him in rapt silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying steady and clear, "tonight is not about me. Tonight belongs to Adam." The audience gasped, then fell into complete stillness again. Tears glistened on cheeks. Hands clutched hearts. No one dared break the spell. Freddie pointed toward the third row. "Security," he said, gesturing urgently. "Bring him to me. Now." The guards hesitated. This wasn't the plan. This wasn't safe. But Freddie's eyes were fire. "Now," he repeated, sharper. Two security men carefully made their way into the crowd. Adam's mother held him tight, looking to Freddie for confirmation. Freddie nodded, his hand pressed to his heart. The guards lifted Adam gently, helping his parents through the throng. The audience parted, silent and reverent, as though witnessing a sacred procession. Freddie stepped down from the stage edge, reaching out his arms. And then it happened. The most flamboyant, powerful, untouchable rock god in the world scooped a frail, dying boy into his arms. The image pierced every soul in the arena. Adam's head rested against Freddie's shoulder, his small fingers curling into Freddie's sweat-soaked shirt. His cap slipped slightly, revealing more of his bare scalp, but Freddie adjusted it gently, cradling him as though he were made of glass. The arena exploded in applause, not the usual scream, not the wild frenzy of a rock concert, but a slow, emotional swell of clapping, like the sound of hearts breaking and healing at the same time. People sobbed openly. Couples hugged. Strangers held each other. Freddie pressed his lips to the microphone, his voice trembling with emotion. "This boy is the bravest soul in this room," he declared. "And tonight, he is the reason we are here." He turned back toward the piano, still holding Adam. The band stared in awe as Freddie, with a boy in his arms, lowered himself carefully onto the bench again. The audience leaned forward, breathless. Freddie kissed Adam's forehead, then whispered into the mic, "Shall we sing together, darling?" Adam, weak but determined, nodded. Freddie placed him gently on his lap, adjusting the mic so that the boy's voice could be heard. His own fingers returned to the keys, striking the first chords of "Love of My Life." The moment had shifted. This wasn't a concert anymore. It was something holy. The arena, once a temple of thunder, became a cathedral of silence, of reverence, of love. And as Freddie and Adam began to sing together, the world, all 18,000 souls inside those walls, leaned in, knowing they were witnessing history. The arena had never been so quiet. No rumble of drums, no wail of guitars, no thunder of voices. Just a faint hum of stage lights and the fragile breathing of 18,000 people who knew they were standing on the edge of something unforgettable. Freddie Mercury sat at the piano, Adam on his lap, the boy's small body leaning gently into his chest. His thin fingers gripped the microphone stand, his baseball cap slightly askew, his eyes wide as if he couldn't quite believe where he was. Freddie's own hands hovered above the keys for a moment. He glanced down at the boy, his expression stripped bare of flamboyance, all showmanship peeled away. In its place was something raw, unguarded, deeply human. "You ready, darling?" Freddie whispered, his lips close to Adam's ear, though the microphone picked it up enough that the arena heard it too. Adam nodded, his weak smile glowing like a flicker of light in the dark. Freddie pressed the first keys, the gentle, familiar chord of "Love of My Life." The sound washed softly across the crowd, delicate as a lullaby. Then Freddie's voice came, quieter than usual, intimate, trembling with sincerity. "Love of my life, you've hurt me." His voice filled the space, not as a rock anthem, but as a tender confession. Adam, mustering all his strength, began to sing alongside him. His small, fragile voice cracked, faltered, but carried on, and through the microphone, it soared into the rafters of the arena. The effect was immediate. 18,000 people froze, their hearts in their throats. The sound of Freddie Mercury's voice blending with the weak, trembling notes of a dying child was unlike anything they had ever heard. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished. But it was real, painfully, achingly real. The audience began to cry. Rows of people wiped at their faces, some burying their heads in their hands. Tough men who had come for a night of rock and roll wiped tears from their eyes. Teenagers clutched each other, shaking their heads in disbelief. And then, something incredible happened. As the second verse began, the crowd, 18,000 strong, softly joined in. Not with their usual roar, not with the deafening chant they were used to giving Freddie, but gently, reverently, like a choir of mourners offering comfort. Bring it back, bring it back. The voices rose, surrounding Freddie and Adam like a blanket of sound. A lullaby from strangers. The boy tilted his head toward the crowd, his eyes shimmering. He could feel it, the love, the unity, the impossible swell of compassion from thousands of strangers. Freddie's throat tightened as he kept singing. He leaned closer to Adam, guiding him through the lines, sometimes letting the boy's voice take the spotlight, sometimes covering for him when he faltered. His free hand held Adam close, steadying him, as though protecting him from the weight of the world. The boy's mother stood in the wings now, her face buried in her husband's chest, sobbing openly. She couldn't believe what she was witnessing, her son, who doctors said would never make it to tomorrow, sitting on stage with Freddie Mercury, singing his favorite song in front of the entire world. Freddie's voice swelled, rich and powerful, lifting Adam's small tones like a tide carries a fragile boat. Together, they reached the chorus again, and the crowd's voices joined in full. Love of my life, can't you see? Bring it back, bring it back. The arena became a cathedral. Not a single voice was raised above another. It wasn't about volume anymore. It was about reverence, about unity, about giving this boy his final gift. By the final verse, Freddie's tears had blurred the keys. He blinked rapidly, forcing his voice steady. Adam leaned into him, his face tired but peaceful, his voice still trembling along. Please, bring it back home to me. The song ended not with a roar of applause, but with silence, a deep, aching silence. The kind of silence that carries weight, that says more than any scream could. Then Adam shifted, slowly, with trembling fingers. He reached up and pulled the baseball cap from his head. Beneath it, his scalp was patchy, bare from months of chemotherapy. The arena collectively gasped. And then, in a gesture that will be remembered for decades, Adam placed a cap on Freddie's head. For you, he whispered. The words echoed faintly through the microphone, but everyone heard them. Freddie froze, his breath catching audibly in the mic. His hand flew to his mouth, his composure cracking. The audience erupted, not in the wild chaos of a rock show, but in applause so thunderous it shook the rafters, applause born of love, grief, and awe. Freddie turned away from the piano, cradling Adam against his chest, tears running freely down his face. He pressed his lips to the boy's temple and whispered something no microphone caught, something meant only for Adam. The crowd could see it, though, Adam's weak smile blooming into something brighter, more alive than had been in months. Freddie stood then, carrying the boy in his arms. He walked slowly to the front of the stage, the lights chasing him, illuminating the most iconic sight of the night. Freddie Mercury, the rock god, standing vulnerable and human, clutching a dying boy as though he were the most precious thing in the world. He lifted Adam slightly so the crowd could see him. Ladies and gentlemen, Freddie said, his voice thick, his accent more pronounced with emotion. This is Adam. He is 7 years old. He is stronger than any of us. And tonight, he paused, swallowing hard. Tonight, he is the reason we sing. The arena erupted once more, this time in a tidal wave of applause and sobs that shook the very walls. People shouted Adam's name. Strangers hugged each other. It was no longer 18,000 individuals. It was one heartbeat, one song, one family. And in that moment, Freddie Mercury wasn't just a performer. He wasn't just a legend. He was a man holding on to something infinitely greater than fame. He was holding on to humanity itself. When the lights dimmed and Adam was carefully returned to his parents at the side of the stage, the arena was still trembling for what had just happened. The crowd clapped, sobbed, and whispered to one another, unable to process what they'd seen. They had come for a Queen concert, for fireworks, for spectacle, for the dizzying roar of rock and roll. Instead, they had witnessed something that stripped all of that away, leaving only the raw, vulnerable humanity of a man and a boy. Freddie Mercury stood at the center of the stage, still catching his breath, the boy's baseball cap perched lopsided on his head. His mascara had run from the tears he hadn't bothered to wipe away, and his chest still heaved from the intensity of it all. For a long moment, he didn't move. He simply looked out into the crowd, thousands of tear-streaked faces staring back at him, and let the silence hold. Then he took the microphone again. "I'll tell you something, my darlings," he said, his voice thick but steady. "That boy is the bravest star in this room tonight. And he has reminded me, and I hope all of you, why we sing at all." The audience erupted once more, a rolling wave of applause that seemed to carry Adam's name through the rafters. Freddie pressed his hand against his heart, then gave a small, almost imperceptible bow. "Now," he added, his tone shifting slightly, "shall we give him the kind of show he'll never forget?" The roar that followed shook the arena. Brian May struck the opening riff of We Will Rock You, and the ground itself seemed to quake as 18,000 pairs of feet stomped in unison. The concert surged forward, but it was different now. Every lyric, every chord, every clap seemed to carry Adam's spirit. Freddie was electric again, commanding, playful, wild, but there was an edge of sincerity beneath it that had never been there before. He wasn't performing at the audience anymore. He was performing with them. Song after song ripped through the night. Bohemian Rhapsody, Radio GAGA, Crazy Little Thing Called Love. The arena roared, but the roar was changed. It wasn't just adoration. It was communion. And every so often, Freddie's hand would drift to the baseball cap on his head, adjusting it, grounding himself in the reminder that tonight wasn't about glory. It was about connection. Backstage, hours later, the atmosphere was quieter, calmer, but no less charged. Crew members bustled about packing gear, but whispers followed Freddie wherever he walked. Everyone had felt it, the turning point of the night, the moment that had transformed a concert into something sacred. Freddie barely acknowledged the chatter. He was focused on one thing, Adam. He had insisted the boy and his parents be brought backstage after the show, despite objections from handlers worried about time, schedule, or press. Freddie had waved them all off with a sharp look. "I don't care about schedules." He comes back. Now, in his dressing room, Freddie sat cross-legged on the carpeted floor, still in his sweat-soaked stage clothes, with Adam lie on the couch beside him. The boy looked utterly exhausted, his small chest rising and falling with labored breaths, but his eyes still glowed. Freddie leaned close, his voice soft. "Well, darling, what did you think? Was it loud enough for you?" Adam giggled weakly, the sound barely more than air, but it made Freddie's heart clench. "It was the best ever," the boy whispered. "You sang just for me." Freddie smiled, his hand brushing Adam's hair back under cap. "Yes, I did, and I'd do it 1,000 times more." Adam's parents stood nearby, their faces streaked with tears, watching in silence. His mother clutched her husband's hand so tightly it was white. They had seen their son come alive in a way doctors told them he never would again. Freddie turned to them briefly. "He is extraordinary," he said, his tone earnest, almost reverent. "Don't let anyone ever tell you otherwise." Then he leaned back toward Adam. "You know what, my little star? I think you've got more music in you than most grown men I've ever met. Shall we sing one more before you go?" Adam's eyes widened, and he nodded. Freddie stood, grabbed his acoustic guitar from its stand in the corner, and strummed a gentle chord. The sound filled the small room, warm and intimate, so different from the arena, but somehow just as powerful. He began to play Love Me Like There's No Tomorrow, one of Queen's softer songs, his voice hushed, tender. Adam joined in where he could, his voice faint but filled with determination. The boy's mother broke down completely, covering her mouth to keep from sobbing aloud. When the song ended, Freddie set the guitar down, kneeling by Adam once more. He unclipped one of his stage scarves, still damp with sweat, and draped it gently around the boy's shoulders. "There," he whispered. "Now you've got something of mine. You hold on to that, all right." Adam touched the scarf with trembling fingers, his smile soft but radiant. "Thank you, Freddie." Freddie kissed his forehead. "No, darling. Thank you. You reminded me tonight why I do this at all. It's not about lights or money or fame. It's about hearts. And yours," he tapped Adam's chest lightly, "is the bravest of them all." When the family finally left, escorted tenderly by security, Freddie remained in the dressing room, staring at the empty couch. For once, the man who never seemed to stop talking, laughing, commanding, had no words. Brian meandered quietly, guitar case slung over his shoulder. He studied his friend for a moment, then said softly, "That was something else tonight." Freddie didn't look up. He only whispered, "That boy, he changed everything." Brian nodded, his own eyes misty. "You gave him the night of his life." Freddie shook his head slowly, finally looking up. "No, darling, he gave me the night of mine." Word spread like wildfire. Fans leaving the arena didn't just chatter about the music or the encore. They spoke of Adam. They spoke of the silence, the lullaby, the cap on Freddie's head. Bootleggers would circulate fragments of the moment, though recordings never captured the weight of it. People who had been there would spend decades saying, "You had to feel it. You had to be in that room." That night, Queen hadn't just given a concert. They had given a story that would outlive them. And Freddie Mercury, the man who had always worn armor made of glitter and bravado, walked away with something he'd never expected. A scar on his soul, one made not of pain but of love. By the time the sun came up the next morning, the posters outside the arena were already peeling at the corners, their ink still tacky from the night air. Street sweepers combed the sidewalks for beer cups and confetti, and a few stragglers in crumpled Queen shirts wandered off like dreamers waking reluctantly. The city returned to traffic and routine. But for 18,000 people, sleep hadn't come easily. A bartender closed his eyes and still saw Freddie's silhouette, with a boy in his arms. A couple in the upper tier woke to tear-stiff cheeks, holding each other in a quiet kitchen. A security guard texted his daughter simply, "You won't believe what I saw." None of them needed a bootleg tape to remember. Every heart had recorded it. In a small apartment a few miles away, Adam slept until noon, wrapped in a damp stage scarf that smelled faintly of sweat and cologne and electricity. His mother sat near him in a chair, arms folded, watching the rise and fall of his chest with the kind of vigilance that has its own heartbeat. His father made pancakes he knew Adam wouldn't finish. It didn't matter. The kitchen needed to smell like pancakes. When Adam stirred, he touched the scarf and smiled. "Do we still have a cassette?" he whispered. His father nodded, slid a tape into the old player on the counter, and Love of My Life floated into the room like a secret. They didn't speak for the length of the song. Doctors had not promised months. They had said days. But days, one stacked, began to look like weeks, and the weeks, against all medical expectation, started to resemble a season. Adam was not cured. The body tells the truth even when joy tries to bargain with it. But something shifted. The fear stepped back a pace. The nights came softer. Pain still visited, but it did not break him. When it did, his mother put on that song and pressed her forehead to his, and the night learned to be gentle. There were small miracles, the kind that don't make headlines because they belong to kitchens and porches. Adam finding the breath to sing a whole chorus. The three of them eating dinner at the table instead of the bed. A game of cards at the windows open, and a breeze nudging curtains. A laugh that lasted so long it made him cough and then laugh again. On good afternoons, his father would carry him outside, and they'd sit on the steps. Adam would angle the baseball cap. The spare one. The real one was safe now, folded on his dresser like a crown, and asked impossible questions about the sky and what songs sounded like from up there. His mother would answer with the confidence of parents who decide reality is a story and they're allowed to edit it. Tour buses don't wait for epiphanies, but epiphanies sometimes manage to climb aboard. Freddie left the city with the cap in his bag, nestled among eyeliner pencils and fingerless gloves, as if it had always belonged there. The crew noticed something new in him during sound checks. A hush that preceded the roar, a hand that drifted unthinking to the cap before the first song. He still strutted, still proud, still lit the fuse in every arena, but a new filament glowed inside the bulb. He called the promoter's office from the road. "If there are children who want to come, the kind who can't always come, bring them," he said. Not to the front page, to the front row. Between shows, letters started to arrive. Some were fan shrines, glitter and perfume and postcards from places he'd never visit. Some were shaky handwriting on hospital stationery. And then one evening, after a rehearsal where he couldn't quite find the note he wanted, a simple envelope appeared with a smudge of flour on it. The return address was familiar. "Dear Freddie, Adam wanted to write, but he's sleeping. He made it to the park today and fed the ducks. He asked me to tell you he wore your scarf and that it kept him brave. He also says you should drink water after every song because you sweat like a rainstorm. With love, M. Freddie laughed out loud at the last line and cried at the rest of it. He wrote back on hotel stationery, his handwriting too dramatic for small paper. Tell him I shall hydrate like a camel, he promised. And tell him the scarf is magic. It only works for heroes. At the next show, he carved a tiny quiet into the set, a place where the noise stepped aside and the human walked through. Sometimes he'd dedicate a song to the bravest small person I know. Sometimes he'd say nothing at all and just play the chords softer than usual, as if leaving space for a second voice that might or might not arrive. The band adjusted without discussing it. Brian found new harmonics during the delicate moments. Roger held his sticks a breath longer over the toms. John changed nothing, because being the ground is also a form of prayer. Months don't announce themselves. They just happen when you aren't looking. When the time finally came, it was not dramatic. The room was dim and tidy. The scarf was cool against Adam's throat. The cassette whirred and clicked. His mother's palm covered his sternum the way she had when he was a baby and couldn't fall asleep unless her heartbeat taught him how. His father sat on the edge of the bed with his head bowed and his eyes open. I'm not scared, Adam said, because sometimes the bravest thing a child can do is save his parent from a sentence they can't finish. We know, they both answered, because sometimes the bravest thing parents can do is let the universe overhear their courage. They played Love of My Life one more time. He closed his eyes before the last refrain, not from pain, but because he liked how the song looked in the dark. When the tape clicked to silence, the room did not feel empty. It felt like the arena had felt, a hush the size of a cathedral. They invited only family to the service. The cap stayed with Freddie, the second cap when the casket crooked, the way Adam wore it when he wanted to look mischievous. On the way home, the car radio shuffled and found a Queen song at random, and all three of them, mother, father, absence, laughed at the timing, at the kindness of it. A week later, a brown package arrived at their door. Inside was a framed photo from a concert they hadn't attended. Freddie, head tipped back, hand to his chest, the cap shadowing his eyes. No inscription, just a thin gold line pressed into the matting. For the bravest star. They put it on the piano. At night, the mother sometimes sat there and tapped a single key. The note would hang in the air for a beat longer than physics should allow, as if sound itself had learned something from their son about staying. People who were in the arena that night told the story for years. They told it on first dates and in hospital waiting rooms, and at tables where teenagers rolled their eyes until, somewhere in the middle, they didn't. They told it to friends who didn't like Queen and to strangers who did. You had to be there. They always said at the end, which is another way of saying, I am still there and a part of me always will be. Bootleg circulated, fuzzy and incomplete. In most of them, the mics caught only a sliver of the boy's voice. It didn't matter. The important part had never been on tape. The hand on the cap, the look on Freddie's face, the moment 18,000 lungs agreed to breathe together. Freddie kept the cap in a trunk he pretended was a mess and actually curated like a museum. Before shows, he touched it. Not every show. Only the ones where the noise threatened to make him forget why noise needs silence to mean anything. When people asked him, in interviews and parties and late-night rooms that smelled of sweat and roses, what his favorite performance had been, he usually deflected with a joke. But sometimes, when cameras were off and glasses were emptying, he would say, the one where the audience sang a lullaby, and leave it at that. Years later, a young singer stood backstage at a different arena and ran a finger along a scuffed piano lid, feeling the groove where years of rings had nicked the finish. She had been told the story by a guitar tech, who had been told by a lighting rigger, who had heard it from a security guard, who had texted his daughter. Stories travel like that, not in straight lines, but in pulses. She stepped onto the stage to a familiar thunder and decided, a minute into her set, to make a little space in the middle. Just enough for a quiet chord. Just enough for one small voice to be heard if it wanted to be. The crowd didn't know why the silence felt important, but it did. They leaned in. That is the shape of legacy. Not a statue, but a habit of listening. The night a 7-year-old changed Freddie Mercury's concert forever did not end when the house lights went up. It kept happening. in kitchens and dressing rooms, in letters and in the stretch of a hand toward a tattered cap. It kept happening every time Thunder learned to share the stage with a whisper. Freddie had said, "Tonight is not about me. Tonight belongs to Adam." He was right then. He is right still. Because the greatest performances aren't measured in decibels, but in the moments when a room full of strangers discovers it as one heartbeat and learns, for a song's length, how to carry it together. If you like this story, please subscribe to support this channel.